Hi, Rev here. Sorry it took so long to get back. I've had company, visitors from overseas. What we're going to do now is we're going to go over Matthew, the Empire Strikes Back. That title is given by Warren Carter, whose book Matthew in the Margins I'm using quite a bit. Um, and this is where we begin to see the reaction of other people towards Jesus, even in his birth. And so what we've noticed so far is it's really important to look at the context, and the context so far has shown that Jesus is uh, he's born in the margins. He's born in a marginalized class of people that are being oppressed under a foreign ruler. He's born to poor parents, but yet the actions of God are working through him. Now, what we're going to pay attention to now is um, the location and what that means. So I'm gonna just read. We're gonna start with Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who is born King of the Jews? For we have seen his star in the east, and have come to worship him. When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all of Jerusalem with him. And when he gathered all the chief priests and scribes of the people together, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. So they said to him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are not the least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod, when he had secretly called the wise men, determined from them what time the star appeared, and he sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go and search carefully for the young child, and when you have found him, bring back word to me, that I may come and worship him also. And when they heard the king, they departed, and behold, the star which they had seen in the east, and went before them till it came and stood over where the young child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceedingly great joy. And when they had come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented gifts to him, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Then, being divinely warned in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed for their own country another way. Now, I'd just like to point out a couple of interesting things. It's really important. I think there's 3 points to this, not to be too homiletically correct, but there's 3 points here that we really have to focus on. The one is the centrality of Bethlehem. Now, Jesus comes representing the coming king, the king of the Jews. That point is made succinctly clear. But when the astrologers, which they were not wise men, they were astrologers, when the astrologers go to Herod, Herod's title was the king of the Jews, which is interesting, but we'll talk about that a bit more later. They go to the capital of the area, which is Jerusalem, and they go to speak to the high officer in the high governmental building. But the king of the Jews the new king of the Jews was not there. And they go to the temple, and the king of the Jews wasn't there. God chooses to bring forth the Christ, the Messiah, not in the midst of the power structures, not even in the region with the power structure of Rome, which was in Herod, or the power structure of the religious entity in the temple. Neither one of them is where God chooses to start his redemptive process, but out in Bethlehem. And the scripture that Matthew quotes from Micah, he changes it. He doesn't change the scripture, but he gives it a different flavor so that he emphasizes the fact that Bethlehem, which seems like such an insignificant place in an insignificant tribe, winds up becoming extremely important. Um, and and from that small place comes a ruler that will shepherd God's people, but also all of the Gentiles. Now, the second bit that we come to is these wise men, we call them wise men, we call them kings, but the fact is they're called astrologers. Now, if you look at today's church, we don't look very, kindly upon astrologers. But these people were astrologers. In ancient Roman writings, these people were mocked just like astrologers of today are mocked. But these people, seeing some star, they come looking for the person that is supposed to be the king of the Jews. And the place they come from is, they're Persians. They come from the east. They come from Iraq or Iran. Now it's interesting that these people from Iraq and Iran that were Gentiles, that were astrologers, that were not religious people, they come looking for the one born king of the Jews. And they go to the king of the Jews, Herod, and they ask him where he was born. And this is what happens. The king of the Jews realizes that there's a threat to his kingship. He gets a little bit uncomfortable. It says that he becomes fearful, and all of Jerusalem with him. They're worried. What is this about? This isn't good. And he calls all of the religious leaders together, and he asks them where the Christ was to be born, and they know. So they know what's going on, that a new king of the Jews is born. They know where, and the leaders of the religious leaders of the day, they don't go to find him. They don't go to look for him. They're fearful just like Herod is, because they're worried that their place of power is going to be interrupted, just like Herod is. So Herod and the religious powers of the day, they set up a structure. It's not the Gentiles against the Jews in this structure. It's the outcasts against the elite and the powerful. The elite and the powerful are the ones that don't want anything to do with Jesus. But these Persian and Iraqi astrologers go, and they find Jesus, and they actually worship Jesus, which is an interesting thing. Now, tied up in all of this, we see Herod has this plan. And his plan is to find the location of Jesus and to try to end the threat. And we'll find out later how he does this. But what he asks is he asks these astrologers to come back and tell him where Jesus is. But they come, they worship, they give him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And that's why we think there was 3 of them, but it's actually no mention of how many there were. There's a lot of people that talk about the symbolism of the gifts, and I'm not going to get into that very much. But what I do know is that these people give a picture of the Gentiles from all around coming into to worship the new King of the Jews, to give gifts, to offer homage, to recognize the sovereignty of this new king. Meanwhile, the actual Jewish elite and the King of the Jews refuse to do so. These people that have been faithful with the little they have are then warned by God himself in a dream not to go back to Herod. So they go back to their country their own way. Now, this leads us to, I think, the most important part. Isn't it more important, rather than coming up with pithy little sayings like wise men still seek him, isn't it more important that we begin to realize that the systems and structures that we rely on for our privilege and our power, that those are the very systems that when God comes into the world, he stays away from? That Christ is born amidst the broken and the maladjusted, and he shows himself to those that aren't even religious. Doesn't that end all judgment? Shouldn't that make us humble?